Essentially, I wanted to talk about some of the primary components of buying a franchise, of selling a franchise, as turning your business into a franchise. There are a lot of reasons why we like to talk about franchising when we're talking about entrepreneurship. So, franchising is a type of entrepreneurship because there's ownership involved, of course. And a lot of businesses that get to a certain point as entrepreneurs realize that they have a duplicatable model, and oftentimes they will choose franchising as a growth strategy. And it's a very effective growth strategy if done properly. So, a couple of terms that I want to make sure that everybody knows. When we're talking about franchising, we're talking about buying into, not necessarily buying a business, building or buying the entire business, but buying some sort of a right to a business. Maybe it's the trademarks or the methods or the manufacturing processes. It's different with different types of franchises. And the franchisor is the party who is writing the contract and allowing their business model or other trademark or licensing to be duplicated. And the franchisee is the one who's buying it. And there are many different types of arrangements. I'll talk about some of the primary ones for those of you who don't know the primary arrangements in entrepreneur or franchising rather. One of the common types you see is a product or trade name franchising. An example of this would be like a car dealership. It isn't the Honda Corporation that's owning and managing and licensing every single Honda dealership. There are independent franchisees who do that, and they're essentially using the product, and they're using the trade name, and they're using much of the systems, but not the entire processes. If it's the entire process, the entire format of the business that they're using, that's called a business format franchise. An example of this would be like Subway restaurants, McDonald's, 7-Eleven, many others. That's when the entire system is franchised out. And some of these are very, very detailed and very interactive and hands-on on the part of the franchisor, meaning that they'll give lots of training, they'll spend a lot of time with the franchisees, but they can also be very expensive. These are the most common. Business format franchising are the most common. We also have manufacturing franchises, and we also have different ways that franchisees can grow within the world of franchising. They very often you'll see that people who get into franchising, they make a lot of money franchising, they like it, and they want to do it again. You used to see a lot of people doing multi-unit ownership. So it was the same type of business, but they own many, many, many units. You don't see that as much anymore. Well, I mean, you still see it, but people are diversifying. You now see sometimes multi-brand franchising where they have many different businesses of different brands. You also see area developers where they'll have a legal right to franchise within a certain area and have the first right of refusal. Piggyback franchising is when you see a franchise that's opened within an existing other business that may or may not be franchised, usually not. For example, Starbucks inside of Target, or McDonald's inside of a Target, or a Subway in a gas station. You see these. That's different than co-branding, although the terms are often confused. Co-branding is when we see two franchises that are physically linked together, not necessarily one inside of another, and they're both franchises. And often they're both the same owner who owns both of those franchises. There are a lot of benefits to the franchisee for franchising. It's a lot faster to actually get to profitability usually. The risk is substantially lower than starting a business from scratch. Is it more expensive? Well, think about this. If you wanted to start a hamburger joint, how much do you think it would cost you to open a hamburger restaurant? I know I could probably open a restaurant, even here in San Diego, for under a couple $100,000. If I was going to buy a McDonald's franchise, it would cost me over $1 million. So usually franchises are more expensive than starting a business from scratch on the average. Of course, individuals are different. But you have a proven system. You have training support from the franchisor. There's economies of scale, meaning that the franchise has developed partnerships or arrangements with suppliers, and so they get things oftentimes less expensive, and they buy in bulk, right? So they take advantage of economies of scale. There's also financial support when you when you are a franchisee, you are often able to take out a loan, right? Which is something that you can't always do in traditional entrepreneurship, where you're starting a business from scratch. Remember when or maybe we didn't talk about this. I think we did in one of the classes. We talked about the 3 F's of entrepreneurship. Where do entrepreneurs get their money to start businesses from scratch? They get their money from friends, from family, and from fools, and that's it. And so it's very difficult to get a loan on an idea, but this is more than an idea when you're starting a franchise. And so it's a little bit easier to get a loan. And those are some other advantages. Like I said, and this is research based. It's not just my opinion. There is actually a decreased probability of failing with the franchise. Some other benefits there. There's also disadvantages as well. Oftentimes the franchisors will exaggerate the claims. They'll make misleading claims. They're trying to sell, right? They're trying to sell. They could be engaged in churning, which is an illegal practice, but it happens, where the franchisor will terminate the franchise agreement in order to sell it again and get another initial franchise fee, especially when they have those high fees. And a lot of times people don't consider the true cost of franchising. I actually had somebody literally say this to me. She said, I was thinking about taking an entrepreneurship class, but I thought, well, maybe I should just start a franchise so I don't need to get any business training. You still need business training. You're still running a business. There are still many costs associated with it. And it's not just that initial franchise fee, although that can be very expensive. There's also investment costs and a lot of the same startup costs that go into starting a business from scratch. There's royalty payments, which are paid typically monthly. Usually it's based on the gross income. And remember, gross means before we take all of the expenses out. And so 10% of gross income is a lot of money that you might have to be paying in royalty payments. There's advertising costs, true advertising costs, and then there's also advertising fees that you often have to pay to the franchisor. It's usually about 1% to 2% of, again, gross sales or gross income. And there's issues of encroachment or other unethical practices by the franchisor, where they act more like a competitor and less like a partner. We see things. Encroachment is where they oversell an area, or maybe they'll start even a corporate-owned store very close to a successful franchisee store. There are a lot of unethical things that can happen, and there's also issues that you can see where where the managers or the franchisors rather will really limit what the franchisee can do. It's entrepreneurship, but it is not unbridled entrepreneurship. The franchisees are very limited by the sales of the contract in terms of where they can sell their territories, where they can advertise, how long they should be open, hours of operation. There's so many requirements that for some entrepreneurs, that's a little too much like having a job. You can also have the disadvantage of having a franchisor being very disinterested and not helping when he or she should, or when the organization should, and essentially just taking the fees and leaving the franchisee on their own. And there are many of the similar challenges that you see in traditional business ownership, you see with franchises as well. So the Federal Trade Commission oversees franchises, and I put lots of information here on things that you should research, places that you can go to find more information on franchises. I shared with you Entrepreneur Magazine's top 10 franchises right now in the United States, and I always think this is interesting, and it includes their ranking and also the startup costs. Now, startup costs is not just that initial franchise fee. That's all of the costs that go into starting the business up until you open the doors on day one. Those are startup expenses, right? There are requirements by the law, or under the franchise rule, which states that all franchisees who have completed a franchise application, are provided with documentation of the state, the financial state, the state of affairs for the franchise. And so we call that the franchise disclosure document. They call it the FDD. So if you want to approach franchising not from the perspective of the franchisee, but the franchisor, it can be an excellent growth strategy. Make sure that your organization understands that it is not, it's not cheap to become a franchisor. You can make a lot of money, but you need to be careful. It's an expensive process to go through, especially the first time. You need to get your operations manuals in order. Oftentimes people outsource and bring in specialists who know how to franchise, because it is a very, it's a different bird. It's a unique process. Or you can buy an existing business. This of the different paths to entrepreneurship, buying an existing business on average is the least expensive route that you can take, which is shocking to a lot of people. But very often it costs more money to start a business from scratch or to buy a franchise than to buy an existing business from an individual or from a business. And there's a lot of benefits. There's the reduced risk of uncertainties. You typically see profits and revenue and profits quite a bit faster. It doesn't take years and years and years to cover all of the expenses, the startup expenses. So there's a lot of benefits. You have existing client bases, customer bases. There's relationships already developed. It's nice to buy an existing business, and I know a lot of people who've done it very, very successfully. I've actually represented a lot of people when I was working. I mean, I still am a broker, but when I was working a lot more as a broker. So like I said, a lot of benefits. Make sure that you rely on a professional. If you are going to buy an existing business, you use brokers. They're listed through the multiple listing service, but it's a special multiple listing service for businesses. And make sure that you get somebody who's specialized in helping people to buy and sell businesses. They're business brokers, but they're licensed through the BRE just like anybody else in real estate. Make sure that you do your due diligence, that you exercise reasonable care, that you consider every potential opportunity and threat to the business. And there are many things that you should be looking into when you're exercising your due diligence, including the financial data of the organization. Now, remember, they'll be providing you a lot of that data, so it can be misleading. It can be misleading. Make sure to review the data back 5 years, and make sure that you're reviewing all of their data, not just the sales data. Look at the way that they valued the business. There are many ways to value a business, both quantitative and qualitative. Make sure that you are that they're doing it right, that they're doing it fairly. You'll have to sign an NDA when you're looking at financials, a non-disclosure agreement. Do it, because if not, no one would provide their financials without it, or not many people would. And like I said, there's many different ways to value a business. A professional will know the different ways. There are quantitative factors and qualitative factors, but even in the quantitative factors, there's some subjectivity in there as well. So for example, in the market comparable valuation, that's of course we're using the sales price of comparable firms, but the subjectivity comes in, and when you think about the experience it takes to know which comparables to choose in order to use those, because you can change the value of a business by a lot of money, depending on the approach that you take when you are valuing the business. Right? So there are many non-qualitative factors, purely subjective, and then also non-qualitative that are less subjective. And you should look at all of these. The market. Can the market support all of the competition? How intense is the competition? Where is it located? What are they selling? What price are they selling it at? Is the community facing any future development? Or is there a proposed building going up next door? And how might that impact our sales? Are there any collective bargaining agreements that would have an impact on the way that we do business, et cetera, et cetera? All of these things need to be considered. And then you need to negotiate the deal, close the deal. Always use licensed business broker, licensed to represent, or who represents only you, not a dual agent. You don't want somebody who might be tempted to behave in their own interest and not protect that fiduciary duty between you and them. So that's that with franchises. I hope I didn't talk too long. I hope I answered all of your questions, or gave you a better understanding of franchises and of buying existing businesses. I think that both of these are excellent paths to entrepreneurship. If you have any questions, of course, always reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Take care.